Thank you, Oliver. Thank you to the organizing committee for putting on this wonderful event. Marius, for all the hard work, and your entire team. It's been a pleasure to be a part of each one of these, and hopefully we deliver an even better set of presentations than what we have at the first couple. My name is Clayton Johnson. I am a veterinarian from the United States, and I help pig farms. My job description is pretty straightforward. I go to the farm, I try to see what opportunities there are to improve, and we try to put resources on targets. We'll talk about a fictional case study today. It is not a real farm, not a real set of diagnostics, but I think you will find it is very familiar to challenges that you have, whether it is a PRRS challenge or a PCV challenge or a parvo challenge. We'll talk through several different diseases specifically, but really I hope what you learn from this is the thought process of how to understand what is going on and how to influence change for the better. Let's talk a little bit about nomenclature. It may seem like semantics, but the term endemic disease is very important. Endemic disease, by definition, is a pathogen that will infect the entire population of pigs. That is the majority of the pathogens we deal with. Diseases like PCV, we expect circovirus to infect every pig. It is not practical for us today to eradicate circovirus from any pig population. Now, infection does not have to equal disease. How many of us are infected with E. coli right now? All of us. 100% of us are infected with E. coli. How many of us are diseased? You don't have to raise your hand. Just wash your hands very thoroughly at the bathroom. But you get the example. The majority of pathogens, the majority of time, live in harmony with the host, okay? Now, that is fantastic that we don't have a disease situation normally, but it does make the diagnostics a little bit tricky. We can't just do a culture and identify the bacteria and say cause and effect. I found strep suis on the culture, so my disease situation must be due to strep suis. It is not that straightforward. Dr. Pablo Pinheiro is going to take you through an entire presentation to talk about PCV2 and how a PCR positive result for PCV2 tells you very little, to be honest with you. It's a good starting point, but we need more evidence, more information to make decisions. Epidemic disease is the opposite. Epidemic disease is a pathogen we do not expect to find. If we find evidence of the pathogen, a culture or a PCR positive, we know it is bad news. We expect the animals to be naive. Any infection is a problem. So African swine fever is a great example of an epidemic disease. The PCR result being positive is all we need to know to tell us that we have a problem, okay? We're gonna focus on endemic disease today, and we're gonna talk about it at the sow farm level, but you're gonna see that really sometimes the disease expression can be in the finishing side of the business. In our situation today, we have a producer who is very heavily invested in the pig industry. They have a 6,000 sow farm, and they have set up their production flow so that this 6,000 sow farm sends weekly batches of weaned pigs to 3,000 head nurseries. So every week we send a batch of our weaned pigs from this sow farm to a nursery. The nurseries operate all in, all out, and they flow into a series of finishers that are the same sizes as the nurseries. As a veterinarian, I would tell you this is a very well-designed system. This is a good opportunity to try and take advantage of all in, all out, segregated production. So we have a nice system to start with, but this producer is unhappy with their performance. They are calling in the team of myself and Daniel, Pablo, and Lance to say, my performance is not competitive, right? We're all dealing with a high cost of production right now, all over the world. And if your performance, your mortality, your feed conversion, your daily gain, your PSY, however you measure your biologic performance, if it's not acceptable, now's the time where we really have to take a hard look at it. So this producer has called us in and has said, my performance is bad, I need help. I need you to help make my performance better. And we'll go through in my presentation some of the feedback that this farm is giving us. What are they thinking? What are they seeing? So starting with the sow farm, when I talk to this producer, we will always talk about PRRS at a sow farm. And this sow farm was built and stocked without any wild type PRRS infection. It was vaccinated against PRRS, so to use our AASV terminology, or I actually saw this called the Holtkamp terminology in a poster yesterday, so we've got to give Daryl some crap about his name being on the PRRS nomenclature. But to use the ASV or Holtkamp nomenclature, this farm was stocked as a stage 2 MLV farm. Now they have had wild type PRRS strains come in. And unfortunately, most recently, they had an introduction of a strain you're probably all familiar with, the Rosalia strain. So, virulent strain of PRRS. No fun to deal with. Clinical signs at the sow farm and poor quality pigs all throughout the different production phases. Now, that outbreak with Rosalia at the sow farm was about 18 months ago. So, it is in the rear view mirror, so to say. And the clinical signs at the sow farm are not significant, is the feedback that I get. The sow farm did close the herd. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with herd closure. No new gilt introductions, right? Everything is infected. We hope that the disease burns out, so to say, that the disease goes away in that population. And that's always the hope when you start the herd closure. But patience sometimes is not our best friend. And we got 8 months into the PRRS closure. And what has happened 8 months into any herd closure? We're out of gilts. And we've been out of gilts for a little while. And we're not making breed target. And the markets are down. We have to leverage this big cost of the sow farm. We have to put no more pigs out. So we stuck gilts back in the farm before we had truly eliminated the wild type strain of PRRS. Recent performance at the farm has not been very bad, and I'll show you some metrics here in a second. But the feedback I get is that the mummies are a little over target, but we think that's just some of the older gilts and getting exposed to PRRS, but really clinical signs are not that bad. So before I talk to you about the sow farm metrics, let's talk about the growing pigs, because this is the problem. Where do most producers make or lose money? The growing pigs. Right? That is king in any production system. And this producer has a mortality problem. I like to measure wean to finish mortality in terms of a weekly percentage of death loss for every week post-weaning. So think of this as all the pigs that we have put on feed over the last year and the percent death loss within this flow at every week post-weaning. The nursery mortality is not exceptionally bad. It's not good, but it's not exceptionally bad. You can see we have a spike of mortality here at about 6-7 weeks post-weaning, cleaning up, right? These pigs need to move to the finisher. We tried really hard to start some pigs. The hard starting ones we could never really get to come around. We euthanized some of those pigs before moving to the finisher. It's the finisher mortality which jumps out to me. Would really like to see that back down here around 0.2% per week or lower, and I really don't like the trend line, the fact that we see the mortality even actually going up throughout the finishing stage. If you average all this out, this producer is looking at about 10% wean to finish mortality. So a difficult number to be very competitive with. When I talk to the folks at the nursery, the feedback that I get is that they see a lot of variation coming in to the nursery. The sow farm sends them a lot of pigs. They're getting the 3,000 pigs a week. That's not a problem. And most of the pigs look good, but the bottom end pigs are very hard to start. And even when they treat them, even when they pull them into fallback pens, they try management strategies like gruel feeding, they can maybe keep them alive, but those pigs are not thriving. The bottom end population, they have to euthanize quite a few of them at the exit to the finisher. And they're aware that that causes them to go over their mortality target. But a common theme I hear from everybody I talk to is we're doing everything we can. And when I visit the nurseries, when I visit the finishers, I see that. The effort is good, the identification of sick pigs is good. They are using the tools that they have. We're just not being as successful as what we would really like to see. We're doing everything we can. And some feedback that I get is that, the pigs lose body condition in the nursery, and they just don't respond to treatment. So I treat them with a medication, say an antibiotic, maybe an anti-inflammatory, and I just really don't get the response that I want to see. Here you can see a picture of these pigs being placed into the nursery, and you can see what they're describing with the variation. We have some pigs that look excellent coming in, some pigs that don't look so excellent, and that bottom end of the population, they really struggle to get them graduated onto the next stage. Let's talk a little bit about the sow farm now. The feedback I get consistently from the producer is that the sow farm is good. The sow farm is not our problem. The sow farm is the one area of my production system where I am achieving most of my targets, where my production is reasonable, it's competitive. And everything that I see on paper and in person matches that. And I can't tell you how many times as a veterinarian I see this situation. The sow farm is clinically normal, it is producing enough pigs. On paper, there is no problem with the sow farm. But the disease expression simply is not seen at the sow farm. The pathogen is there. The pathogen is heavily masked by maternal antibodies. The pathogen is heavily masked by the fact that the sow farm is mostly adult animals. Adult animals handle disease challenges, whether it's PRRS or influenza, circovirus, better than growing animals do. So the sow farm is producing reasonably well. And this is a common metrics packet that I would see. You can see the target for various different performance metrics. You can see the last week's result for each performance metric, and then you can see a 4-week running average. And everybody wants to talk about PSY at a sow farm. It's one of the most dangerous metrics in all of pig production, but we love to talk about it. We love to talk about PSY. And you can see this farm has a target of 30 PSY. It is hitting the target some weeks. The 4-week average isn't quite there. But the producer is generally okay with how the sow farm is performing. The producer does not really think that this is a big problem. Yeah, the farrowing rate could improve. If you look at the farrowing rate, the producer tells me, yeah, we'd like to be at 90% and we're not there. But overall, you know, the live born is pretty good. The total born is pretty good. I'm generally pretty happy with the sow farm. There's no real problem there. And when I go to the sow farm, I see and appreciate what the producer is telling me. There are no impressive clinical signs at the sow farm. When you walk through the sow farm, you don't see clinical signs of disease. But keep this in mind. That does not mean that the sow farm isn't the root cause of the problem. Now, when I get a chance to talk to the owner is very busy, and as is often the case in a large production system, the owner doesn't work at any of these specific farms on a day-to-day basis. The owner is not the manager of the sow farm or the nurseries or the finishers. The owner is very frustrated. The owner takes a lot of pride in their production quality, and the owner is unhappy that their finishing mortality is not good. The owner wants it fixed and wants it fixed quickly. And I can appreciate that the owner is under tremendous pressure. I can assure you, it doesn't matter where you are raising pigs in the world right now, it's not very fun to do it, even if your pigs are healthy. The markets are bad. A lot of things that we don't control are not working in our favor right now. Our cost of production is extremely high. Our disease challenges are always concerning to us. And the market prices we are getting are generally not very good, at least compared to the cost of production. So the owner is frustrated for many different reasons. And I hear this term a lot when I talk to owners. PRRS was our excuse 18 months ago. It's not our excuse now, right? PRRS isn't an excuse. Disease isn't an excuse. We don't make an excuse when we have a disease of our own, right? We shouldn't think of it that way in the pig population. It's a fact. PRRS is a problem, and it's going to be a problem until we do something to make it not a problem anymore. So don't think of it that way. I would encourage you, if you're an owner, try to be very rational about the situation and accept that PRRS is something that we have to make better. It wasn't an excuse 18 months ago. It's not an excuse now, but if it's present on the farm, we have to do something about it. The owner shares with me they've spent a lot of time working on cost management recently, and that they've made some changes to their trucking. And they're very happy that they have actually been able to utilize a holding room on the sow farm to start to stockpile wean pigs, to decrease the number of trucking events from the sow farm to the nurseries. That has saved on transportation cost. Their transportation cost per pig has gone down, but it has probably gone down at the expense of disease management. What is that holding room at the sow farm? It's a wonderful place for those pigs to commingle and share PRRS or other diseases of concern. When I look at the vet visit reports, they back up this entire story. Really no concerns mentioned by the regular veterinarian who visits the sow farm. Minimal diagnostics. They have done some PRRS testing, but really not a lot, and they collected serum from 30 due-to-wean pigs. Those 30 pigs didn't have PRRS, so that was enough for them to say, no need to really investigate any further. PRRS isn't a problem, move on. I would call that insufficient evidence to really make much of a claim for your PRRS status. There's no shortage of medication being used. They're not in an antibiotic-free program. They are very aggressive in trying to make this situation better, and they are aggressive with water medication, feed medication, and injectable medication. In spite of all this medication, we're still seeing the high mortality. And from the nursery, no real recent diagnostics of note. On the finisher, again, heavy with medication. Most of the mortality is sudden death loss. So these are pigs that they find dead, growing pigs that they walk in one day and they find dead. And they have done some diagnostics in the finisher. They collected oral fluids from 2 finishers, tested them both with PCR for PRRS and PCV2, and they were positive for both. Okay, this is a challenging situation for me as a veterinarian because I have to explain that, particularly with the PCV2, I don't know what that tells me. I don't understand what the PCR positive on oral fluids and finishing pigs really suggests. It's hard for me to make any conclusions, but as you'll see in a couple of slides, the farms are making some conclusions based on those diagnostics. The vaccine schedule for the farm is fairly normal. So for gilts at weaning, they receive Circoflex and Mycoflex. And then when we select them, we start to provide them with their reproductive vaccines, so ReproCycle and PRRS vaccination. And then we have some cycle-based vaccinations where we'll booster the PLE vaccine as well as influenza and APP in that flow. And then we'll do some mass vaccinations at the sow farm as well. We'll alternate back and forth using Circoflex on a every year basis on the Circoflex, every 6 months on the Circoflex, and then every quarter we booster the PRRS vaccination. For the growing piglets, Circoflex, Mycoflex at weaning, very common, and then because we do struggle with influenza and APP, they do use some end of nursery influenza and APP vaccination in the growing pigs. So to summarize some of the feedback that I get, and as you know, right, you go work with a client, a set of producers for a week or two, they open up more and more and more, right? And by the end of my investigation, they are telling me what the problem is. They don't want me to investigate. They just want me to back up what they think is real and is the problem. And I hear quotes like this: "Doc, the pigs fall apart in the nursery and they never get better. I've seen this before, it's Circo." I have heard that over and over in my career. Circo is so tough because the clinical signs of circovirus mimic the clinical signs of everything else. It was much like COVID kind of in the early times, right? COVID caused everything. So anytime you had anything happen, well, it could be COVID, right? I mean, the list of things that COVID didn't have as a clinical sign was nothing. Circo's kind of the same way. You see some other complaints here. Tail biting in the finisher. I've seen this before with PCV2. We did the diagnostics. We did the oral fluids. They were Circo positive. What else do we need, right? We know what the problem is. I know somebody who changed their PCV2 vaccines and their mortality got better. I hear that all the time. Everybody knows another farm that has found the magic bullet. I have never found the magic bullet. I've searched my entire career, but everybody knows somebody who has found it. It must be all Paul's farms. They have the magic bullets. You should share them occasionally. So, summarizing the case, we have a big problem, right? A big finishing mortality problem is a big problem, okay? And even worse, I think the sow farm is the root cause of the problem. So we have 6 months worth of growing pigs that already suffer from the problem. We also have blind spots. I need to convince everyone involved that what they think is a Circo problem is probably not at least all of the problem. I need to convince them that part of the way that they are managing the sow farm, living with this PRRS virus, stable clinically at the sow farm, but causing problems post-weaning, I have to convince them I have to bring evidence. I have to bring criteria that meets their expectations of what is the problem. And I'm going to turn it over here now to Daniel to talk to you a little bit about how to gather that evidence, how you should put together a plan that is going to result in having evidence that you can use to effectively communicate what you think is the problem and what we should do about it. So please welcome Dr. Daniel Enhares.
Thanks, Clayton.